The show is edited by Alyssa with the music. The show is edited by Alyssa with music. The show is edited by Alyssa with music. Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair, a global Witcher podcast. My name is Alyssa from GoodMorhen, and I'll be your host as you, I, and our international hanza accompany Geralt of Rivia and his destiny Cirilla of Cintra across the continent. And just like that, we are back for Season 3 of Breakfast in Beauclair. I hope that you guys had a lovely break, as did I. Some of the things that happened over the last 3 months, our hanza over on Discord got very into D&D thanks to our lovely resident DM, Gary from Kentucky. And if you missed it, you can go check out the hanza holiday calendar that ran through December on Instagram and Twitter for a ton of behind-the-scenes content from Breakfast in Beauclair, as well as special messages from your favorite Witcher content creators, Doug Cockle on the 17th and Peter Kenny on the 24th. Aside from that, I hope you all have been doing well. I'm really stoked to get back to Breakfast in Beauclair and to Season 3 and to finally start the Witcher novels. And we have quite the stacked guest list for Season 3, and I'm really excited for you guys to meet everybody who's going to come onto the show this season. To get back to the usual business, this episode we're welcoming Brett from California, Wolf, Brett from Whispers of Oxenfurt, Corey from the US, Tom from Australia, April from the UK, and Kyle with the 2 cats to our hanza on Patreon. Shout out to Katrin from Austria and Gennady Mundilovich who upgraded their pledges. For just $1 per episode, receive an on-air shout-out, access to all of the digital bonus content on Patreon, sneak peeks at behind-the-scenes content, plus secret Patreon channels on Discord. If you check out the artwork for episode 29, it was actually selected by our community of patrons over on Patreon. They got to see a couple different versions of the show art for this episode and select their favorite. Gennady, Katrin, Brett from California, Wolf, and Corey join our producer-level patrons, Louise of Covier, the owner of the Churlish Porpoise, Eric's the Godling, Katie the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacob B., Julie, Jameson, Ava of Gullet, B. Haven of the Edge of the World, Jacob Meeks, Charlotte from Vengerberg Glamrai, Red Kite, the Original Roach, Ariel Kitty, Dustin, Libby the Castel Ravella Sommelier, and Claire Odell. If you'd like to explore becoming a patron of the show, head over to patreon.com/breakfastinbeauclair. In addition to Patreon, Breakfast in Beauclair is now on Coffee. If you would like to support the show through a one-off donation, visit ko-fi.com/breakfastinbeauclair. Thanks to support from the community, I was actually able to upgrade my microphone setup, and I upgraded from my Blue Yeti Nano, which has been with me from the beginning of Breakfast in Beauclair, and I now have a beautiful Rode Procaster, an XLR setup, and I hope that you do see an uptick in the quality of the episodes and editing in Season 3. Thank you so much to our community for supporting the upgrade and continuing to support things that make the show better, like transcripts, audio equipment, new music, and ensuring that we're paying any vendors who contribute to the show a fair fee. As for this episode, Brett from Whispers of Oxenfurt and Lars from WitcherFlix call in for the first half of our discussion of Blood of Elves, Chapter 1. Join us as we learn more about their upcoming projects, Whispers of Hogwarts, and a short history of the Northern Kingdoms, discuss Ithlinne's prophecy, analyze medieval warfare, list the many fantastical beings in the Witcher world again and again and again, take a critical look at how stories and history is made, lament the lost history of the first Battle of Sodden, and decode the many names of the continent's most famous bard. In our mid-episode news segment, Tidings from Toussaint, Lars from WitcherFlix shares tons of production and casting updates for The Witcher Season 2, The Witcher Blood Origins, and Nightmare of the Wolf. Without further ado, let's get to our discussion of Blood of Elves, Chapter 1. Welcome to Breakfast in Beauclair. My name is Alyssa, and I have 2 special guests joining us for the first episode of Season 3. My first guest is an educator and coach from Texas. He's a member of Team Aretuza and plays the Dwarven cleric Dyron in our Discord's America's East D&D campaign. He is also the host of the Witcher podcast Whispers of Oxenfurt and the new Harry Potter podcast Whispers of Hogwarts. Lastly, he is also one of the most highly requested guests on Breakfast in Beauclair. Huge welcome to Brett from Whispers of Oxenfurt.
Thank you very much for having me. And that intro right there, now the pressure, now I'm feeling it. So, but no, I'm ready to talk about this. And again, thank you very much for inviting me on.
Absolutely. And you guys are also going to recognize my second guest voice from his new segment on Breakfast in Beauclair, as well as his 13-track album of original Witcher music. And I'm so pleased to have back Lars from WitcherFlix.
Thank you for having me again. Well, it's so awesome to be back here. Season 3 already.
I know.
It went by so fast.
It did. And so did my 3-month break. It just vanished into thin air.
I imagine. Yeah.
Brett, it's your first time on the show. As I said, welcome. I'd love to talk to you more about Whispers of Oxenfurt, which is the project that really got you into the Witcher community. Could you tell us about how you got into The Witcher and the origin of that podcast?
It was The Witcher 3. Witcher 3 came out, and I remember actually buying a PlayStation 4 and that game coming with it, and me looking at it and being like, I don't want to play this. And I sold it.
Wow.
Brett.
And then I know. And then I don't know when it was. It had to be when I think the Blood and Wine DLC came out. I kept hearing about this game. And I was like, okay, it's medieval history. What the hell? I'll try to play it. And just obsessed with it. And ran through the main story. And then both DLCs in basically under a week. It was nonstop. When I was home, I was playing it. Then got into it, got reading the books. And then at that time, I could not find another English-based Witcher podcast about anything, but especially the books. And I was having lunch with a friend, and I started talking about it. I was like, yeah, there's nothing in there. And it literally just was a click moment. I was like, why don't you just do one? Mm-hmm. And so I just started it.
And I'm just really curious because your background is in history. You teach US and world history. How has your experience with medieval history and more specifically the Crusades impacted or colored your reading of the Witcher series?
It's fantasy, and that's a good thing about fantasies. You can make whatever you want out of it. And the Witcher universe does blend this medieval fantasy world, but it's also an early modern, like to even late Renaissance kind of history with it. But I think what it is, it's just a background or insight thing. Like I try to do that with the podcast. I don't ever want to just put out something that other people are doing or that can do. I want to have my own niche in it, if you want to call it that. And with history, it was it. And I figured there's going to be some people that are into this that want to know more about the history of it. And I just kind of try to explain it as succinctly as possible. And again, as a teacher, hopefully I'm good at it. I don't know. I'll leave that for other people to say. But it's just a role that I was trying to fill and just trying to entertain and educate people as much as I can.
Mm-hmm. And you recently, I think, finished all the books, right?
I did, and you were the final guest for the final chapter to wrap it up.
I was. So go check it out on Whispers of Oxenfurt if you have not already. And as you've kind of closed out the Witcher series, you've also pivoted to a new show as well.
I figured, this could be something fun to do. And again, kind of bring not exactly that same insight of like the historical part in it, because it's obviously not the same, but just another thing to get into. As I think you would know this, once you start podcasting, it kind of becomes, you got to do it. So
right.
I just, it's got to keep that addiction going.
Mm-hmm. And the last thing that I really wanted to ask you about, because I don't think we've ever discussed this on Breakfast in Beauclair before, is Gwent. And you are a part of Team Artusa. I'm so not a part of the Gwent community, but I see it on Twitter, of course. I see it on YouTube, and I'm really, really fascinated by it.
Yeah, Gwent's anybody who's played The Witcher 3 knows the card game in there, Gwent. Now, the standalone version is 100% completely different than that one. They've changed it. And yeah, Team Artusa is like an esports team. And I am not a competitive player at all. I have a very much love-hate relationship with the game. It's a great game, but it can be so infuriating, as all card games can be. I gambled on sports and played cards for like 18 months to 2 years when I was in college to kind of make money. Mm-hmm. So I understand the furiousness you can have with card games. But with Team Artusa, I joined them mainly for like a podcast. I interview people in the Gwent community. It's normally not about the game at all. It's about the individual and about getting to know them a little better. And the community, again, is just very, very good. I recently sponsored a tournament with them, a charity tournament, and we raised something like $2,200 or $2,300 in a couple days, and it was pretty incredible.
Well, that's fantastic. I've played a little bit of Gwent here and there. I would go through kind of phases of sitting around my apartment just playing.
Yeah.
What could you tell our listeners who might be interested in it?
It's the only card game, a collectible card game I've ever played. Like Hearthstone is the big one that I think most people would know about if they, pay attention to those or have ever heard of them or been on Twitch or anything like that. The thing about Gwent that attracted me, and I think a lot of people that do it, is the Witcher part of it. That you can play cards with Geralt, Ciri, Dandelion, all of these people from the books, and it kind of has that feel to it. And it's free to play. First off, you literally don't have to pay any money to do it. So it's not going to cost you anything to try it. But it's a good thing to get that kind of Witcher itch.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm excited to explore it again, hopefully soon. And Lars, I just want to turn the conversation over to you. Again, welcome back.
Thank you.
Lovely to have you. And you've been very busy since the last time we spoke, maybe about a year ago in podcast time.
Yeah.
So you have, as I said, released that 13-track album of original Witcher music, which has been incredible.
I got a little bit carried away, to be honest. I don't know. There was one day, I think it was in May last year or in April of last year, where I just had this strange melody in my head, and I thought, well, this sounds like something that could be played in the Witcher world. And well, this was the start of it all. 2 or 3 weeks later, I had written about, 14 or 15 songs. And, well, it just happened. I don't know what else to say. I didn't want to write a whole album full of Witcher songs, and it just happened. Especially after rereading again the Witcher short stories, as all of the songs are based on things, on lore that happen in the short stories.
Yeah. Well, I feel like with the resurgence of bardcore and sea shanties, I feel like you are right on par with what the youths are doing these days. So I feel like that's great.
Yeah, definitely.
I feel like you hinted at possibly having another album or creating more songs.
Actually, I wanted to stop right there because it was a lot of work while doing my Instagram page at the same time. But, well, what can I say? I think I've written 6 or 7 new songs this year alone.
Lars, it's only February 7th.
Just, I don't know, multiply it by 10 or 11, and then you will have the number of songs I have written at the end of 2021. No, of course not. If you start with the short stories, I think it isn't too far off to continue with the main saga, to say the least. So I leave it at that.
Well, I'm looking forward to 8 albums of Lars's work. Aside from the albums, on the 3rd-year anniversary of WitcherFlix, you announced the fact that you're creating a Witcher lore book called A Short History of the Northern Kingdoms of Kings and Queens, Mages and Witchers.
Yeah. It was a little idea I had, about a year ago or even further ago. And now I'm at the point where I think, well, I'm so far in writing a lore book, I can't stop now. I have to finish it now. Well, to summarize, it's a book. I don't know, maybe you've read the Targaryen history book by George R. R. Martin about the history of the Targaryen dynasty. And, well, Andrzej Sapkowski isn't the biggest fan of his own lore, of writing things that happened in the past of the continent. But here and there, he put some interesting information in the Witcher main saga, in the short story. He did some royal dynasties back in the 90s. You can find them on the internet. And I thought about putting all of this together in one book written by a fictional professor from the Oxenfurt Academy. Well, so I'm not writing it by myself. It's a professor called Eusebius Appleback from Oxenfurt Academy who's put all of this together. And, well, now I'm writing along. Definitely want to illustrate this book. Everybody who likes to draw or paint Witcher stuff is invited to draw or paint something related to the Witcher history. Hit me up on Instagram, and I gladly include it in this book project.
Oh, that's amazing. It's really fascinating to hear of more, obviously, community-based initiatives, and I'm excited that you have one coming up.
You hit the nail on the head there about Sapkowski not caring about his... He didn't even care about his map, like the geography, really. Right. I think the Netflix one that came out is almost the most official because he was involved in it. And I think Lauren said that he had a say in it or something.
Doing a little bit of research for this episode today, I stumbled upon a map by his Czech translator, Stanislav Komarek. He was Sapkowski's Czech translator and close associate. This is what was written in the Witcher wiki. He has written a map about the continent, which is semi-official, I would say.
George R. R. Martin, Fire and Blood, is that Targaryen history. Yeah. He has everything like it's a real history. He cares more about the past than I think he does the books now.
Absolutely.
And Sapkowski just,
Yeah.
man, he does not care. He does not care, yeah.
I mean, I do kind of like that about his work. He ties world building to the characters that we meet, to like the tertiary characters like Applegat. One of the deepest cuts I could possibly make. But yeah, no sense of what the history is outside of what impacts the plot itself.
Well, to be fair, he's written, I think, 4 different royal lines for the 4 big kingdoms in the north, with, I don't know, about 10 to 12 kings with a little bit of backstories, their husbands and wives, their children, their, I don't know, close relatives. But I think you can only find about 2 or 3 sentences, maybe a little bit more about these individual kings, and that's all. And well, George R. Martin has written books about the obscurest kings on the far side of Essos you can think of. So that's a difference between these 2 authors.
Yeah. Well, I'm certainly looking forward to seeing what you're able to compile.
Yeah.
Yeah, if anyone in the community is interested in getting involved with a short history of the Northern Kingdoms, definitely get in touch with Lars.
That would be great, yeah.
So today we'll begin our discussion of Blood of Elves with Chapter 1. And we open the saga with a new introduction to the worlds of The Witcher with a recap of what has transpired on the continent in the 2 years since Sword of Destiny. The book itself opens with Ithlinne's prophecy. And if you are coming from the Netflix series and haven't read the books, this is still going to sound familiar to you. I'll read it out for the sake of conversation. I'm going to take out all the Dwarvish and all the Elven so I can actually read it smoothly. Verily I say unto you, the era of the sword and axe is nigh, the era of the wolf's blizzard. The time of the white chill and the white light is nigh, the time of madness and the time of contempt, the time of end. The world will die amidst frost and be reborn with the new sun. It will be reborn of the elder blood, of the seed that has been sown. A seed which will not sprout, but will burst into flame. Thus it shall be. Watch for the signs. What signs these shall be, I say unto you. First the earth will flow with the blood of the Enche, the blood of elves. This is a prophecy that exists in the worlds of The Witcher, and Sapkowski has chosen to put it in the beginning of Blood of Elves in order to frame the book and its contents.
I don't know how much spoilery this will be, but I think it's definitely to lead off with, this is Ciri, and this is about Ciri, and so much of this is going to be about her. Those first 2 books you read, The Witcher, it's Geralt, and there's this Child of Destiny we've been kind of hinting at. Right here, straight up, before you even start the chapter, is this prophecy, and then when we get started with the chapter, look whose story it begins with.
Mm-hmm. What do you guys think the Blood of Elves that kind of closes this prophecy refers to?
I don't want to, because I'll get too in-depth into it.
Well, maybe that's what it's all about. Maybe it's when you read the book for the first time, it's very strange, obscure, and you don't really know what this refers to. Maybe when you reread it, or, well, at least finish the first 3 or 5, 6 chapters of Blood of Elves, well, it becomes clear what all of this refers to. Well, it's intentional, I think, maybe by the Sapkowski to leave the reader a little bit in the dark, what all of this is about.
And I think, as you said, Brett, it does a very nice job of introducing one of the protagonists of this series moving forward, and that is Ciri. We're immediately dropped into one of Ciri's nightmares that takes her back to Cintra and to the massacre at Cintra. So she wakes from this nightmare, and the Witcher consoles her back to sleep. But it is our first look at what actually happened during the massacre at Cintra.
I like that you called it the massacre of Cintra, or the slaughter of Cintra.
I'm not a Nilfgaardian, Brett.
And that's the thing. You can tell who's a Nilfgaardian by where they call it the battle or the slaughter. And again, I think it was good to lead off with this because we're actually going back to Ciri's idea of what happened and what's in her head and how she viewed it. We're getting it first off, this firsthand account from her. And if there are any other accounts that come after it, we'll kind of have to piece it together and see exactly where it was leading. Because a lot of this was, actually just about all of it, was left out before. And so we're jumping straight into, the major stuff that happened from mainly the previous book, but also just the previous 2 books in general.
The last we heard about Cintra and then also about Marnadal and Sodden, they were really just footnotes to Geralt's story in Something More, the short story that closed out Sword of Destiny. This is the first time we really are experiencing a firsthand account of battle in the Witcher saga. And it's notably, a child's. Ciri is only about, 8, maybe 10 at the time. It's just complete chaos. The chorus that kind of goes in the prose is just hold on and eventually just the word fear over and over again. Lars, you had a couple of notes here about the classic fantasy trope of the Black Knight.
Yeah, very important part of this beginning of the chapter is, of course, this ominous Black Knight kind of hunting for Ciri a little bit. Of course, hunting fits perfectly as Ciri describes him as a bird of prey with his winged helmet, even more stresses that he's looking for something. And well, the Black Knight in itself is a classic fantasy trope in fantasy and mythology. Normally, the Black Knight is mostly a villain masking his own identity, in contrast, of course, to the White Knight, as Andrzej Sapkowski is a big fan of Arthurian legends, of King Arthur, and all of this related to the mythological cycle of King Arthur.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, Black Knights appear several times in the stories about King Arthur. Of course, the Black Knight makes an appearance in the Witcher books too. In all of literature, you can find the Black Knights, even in movies like Monty Python and the Holy Grail, even though, of course, there's a little bit of a twist to the Black Knight.
Uh-huh.
In Sleepy Hollow, for example. In video games, there are Black Knights in World of Warcraft, Dark Souls, of course. And, in Kingdom Come Deliverance, there's some episode with the Black Knight. And this Black Knight doesn't seem to be a very nice dude either, I would say.
No, not at all.
That also comes with, y'all can see and hear one of those swords on the back over there, is from Edward III, whose nickname was the Black Prince. And there are different accounts of how he got that name.
Hey, it's Alyssa. Brett misspoke here and wanted to add that the Black Prince, Edward of Woodstock, was actually the eldest son of King Edward III of England.
And one of the accounts was the French peasants who gave him that name because of all the ravaging and marauding of the countryside that he did. So even, I don't know if that had anything to do with Sapkowski doing this, but from that account would be, oh no, it's black, it's dark, it's bad. It's almost a representation, if you will, of death.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess if you guys look at the canon of Black Knight tropes, is there any way that this knight is different, at least in the short scene we've seen so far? Or does it follow the trope basically to a T?
Oh, well, what do we learn about him at the beginning of the chapter? There isn't too much. He's just the classic threat. We don't learn his identity.
Mm-hmm.
He's looking for Ciri. And he's, amidst flames and fire and a rubbled city. A sea of flames is mentioned. So he fits right into this scenery, actually kind of like a hell. The Christian hell, of course, but yeah, it's Ciri's own personal hell in that moment.
I think it's also important to note that we don't get his identity, and she can only see through the slits in his helmet. And Lars, as you mentioned, there's a massacre going on, and it's just this absolute chaos, and it's through the eyes of a child. They mentioned the Black Knight's motionless arms, and it's almost where Ciri is again being carried away, and it's not even like a human or another person is doing it. It's a manifestation, if you will, of something, of her fear, almost like ripping her away from her home.
It has been quite some time since the massacre at Cintra. We know that she was in Transriver with Druids for about 6 months. After that, she spent some time with them. And then she is now with Geralt. So it has been quite some time, but she's still experiencing this trauma from that experience in Cintra. As we kind of continue to explore Ciri's journey over, the next 5 books, it'll be really interesting to see how her development specifically stems from this experience and from her trauma at Cintra. There was one other note that you had here, Lars, about the symbolism of fire and ice. How does that play into the opening scene?
Well, fire is a very important symbol at the beginning of this chapter. Well, we have it several times in this prophecy you've read out before. Well, a seed which will not sprout but will burst into flame. The fire carries on into the beginning of this chapter. It destroys the city. Ciri is faced with a lot of fire and flames. Very important symbol that even carries on after Ciri awakes.
Mm-hmm.
After she awakes, she sits right by a campfire And, well, the fire turns into a symbol of peacefulness and safety in the form of the campfire. So when she's back in reality, when she's left her dreams, her nightmares, fire isn't so scary anymore.
Mhm.
And the reason for that, well, I think we will see.
She does wake up with Geralt. He's comforting her and kind of settling her back to sleep. We get to see more about her relationship with Geralt, at least in this few brief paragraphs. And her attitude toward him is that of a child and a parent. In her words, she just says, this is Geralt of Rivia. He is the man who is my destiny, the one for whom I'm destined, etc. So there is a very strong bond between them, and that's something that comes out in the prose. This is the first time we've really seen war like this in the Witcher books, having come, of course, from the short stories. How would you say that this brief depiction of war compares to what you guys know about medieval warfare?
The slaughter that happens in here, I do think that people think was very common, that, a town fell and then everyone was massacred, and then where the term rape and pillage comes from, which, again, the rape part of the rape and pillage is not generally the rape that we think of. It's more or less plundering. And I'm trying not to say that word as much, but I do think it's important to understand that it's a different historical term, that stripping a city down and taking it was what they refer to as rape and plunder. A couple of them, again, going back to Crusades, was Jerusalem at the end of the First Crusade and Constantinople in 1204 at the Fourth Crusade, where it was what you would describe as a bloodletting, if you will, where people were hacked down in the streets. And in the First Crusade, there's account of, the streets flowing with blood, which obviously did not happen. That's impossible to have that many dead bodies and have, all that in there. I think it was just saying there were a lot of people killed here. And reading this kind of invoked that of it being the chaos part. And I never really thought about somebody who either wasn't doing the attacking or really being attacked. And the account we get here is an escape. It's an escape of somebody kidnapping someone from the viewpoint of the person that got kidnapped. So I did really, I shouldn't say I really enjoyed reading about this slaughter and kidnapping, but I thought it was done very well.
Before we continue with the episode, we're going to hand it over to Lars and WitcherFlix for recent news on the Netflix show. When we come back, Brett, Lars, and I will continue our discussion of Blood of Elves, Chapter 1.
Hey, it's Lars from WitcherFlix, and this is Tidings from Toussaint. Welcome back, everybody, to a new season full of news, rumors, and tidbits from the Witcher set. It feels great to be back again, and I hope you're all doing fine. So, let's see what happened on the Witcher set since the last episode of Breakfast in Beauclair back in November 2020. Just as a heads up, the filming for Season 2 is still ongoing and is set to finish in the coming weeks. Of course, if there aren't any pandemic-related breaks anymore. So let's keep our fingers crossed. Anyway, after finishing filming scenes at Fountains Abbey in the UK, the production had moved on to other corners of England in November 2020. The crew had filmed a big scene at Frensham Little Pond in Surrey, involving Henry Cavill, Royce Pierson, who plays the mage Istred, Tom Kenton as the elf Filarfandrel, and possibly Jeremy Crawford as the dwarf Yarpen Sigrin. Moreover, there was a big number of elves and Nilfgaardian soldiers present. It is possible that they were filming the big climactic scene for the Season 2 finale here. Moreover, they were also shooting some sequences at night. At the same time, a big dramatic scene involving Anya Chalotra and Freya Elm has been filmed at Frensham Little Pond 2. According to some leaks from the set, the two share a dialogue where they talk about a betrayal from Yennefer's side. It is hard to guess what exactly that means. As some Nilfgaardian soldiers were present at the set too, it's likely that this betrayal involves Nilfgaard in some shape or form. Back in late November, the Witcher crew moved on to Bourne Woods, also in Surrey. And now an important name appears on the Witcher set for Season 2 for the first time. Stunt choreographer Wolfgang Stegemann films a big fight scene involving all Witchers. Geralt, Vesemir, Askel, Lambert, and Cohen were all part of the scene. Stegemann, by the way, is famous in the Witcher world for coordinating arguably the best fight scene of the show, when Geralt took on Renfri's band in the show's pilot episode. Unfortunately, we have no idea what exactly all the Witchers were fighting. Back in mid-December, Henry Cavill had suffered an injury on set. It didn't seem to be too grave, as he was able to continue filming after the Christmas break. but what exactly happened on set is still unknown to us. But it was good to have Henry back that fast. Since then, a great number of important scenes have been filmed. Thanks to some leaks from the set posted by Redanian intelligence, we know some very spoilery things that will happen in Season 2. I don't want to give too much away now, so I only say the following. These scenes involve a surprising plot twist for the Witcher Eskel and some flashbacks to a kingdom that played a very important role in Season 1. Of course, in the meantime, there have also been some casting news for the Witcher show. Most notably, actress Rebecca Hansen will play Meve, Queen of Lyria and Rivia. She will appear in at least 2 episodes. Rebecca Hansen featured in various films and TV shows such as Netflix's Enola Holmes, alongside Henry Cavill by the way, and on the Amazon show Lore. Moreover, she seems to have a thing for fantasy. She will also voice a character in the upcoming video game Baldur's Gate 3. Of course, when there's Queen Meve, the other Northern Kings cannot be that far away. British actor Edward Rowe, known for Bate or Colonel King's Poldark, will play King Henselt, the ruler of the Kingdom of Cadwyn. Both will play a role in one of the most important scenes in the book Blood of Elves, at Hagge Castle. Moreover, actor Alistair Parker has also been cast for Season 2, unfortunately in an unknown role. Beside Mariana Buring, who voiced Anna Henrietta in Blood and Wine, Alistair Parker is another Witcher 3 alumni. He lent his voice to the dwarf Cleaver in the Witcher 3 main game. Another acclaimed actor was also cast in Season 2. Richard Cunningham, who was in His Dark Materials or Star Wars Rogue One, will appear in another unknown role. But let's not forget the Witcher spin-off miniseries Blood Origin, about the early history of the continent, spanning from the conjunction of the spheres to the creation of the first Witchers. The lead role for the show has been cast. British actress Jodie Turner-Smith, known for roles in the thriller movie Queen and Slim or in shows such as Night Flyers, will play an elven woman named Ayle. Thanks to Deadline, we already have an idea what her character is about. She is an elite warrior blessed with the voice of a goddess who has left her clan and position as Queen's guardian to follow her heart as a nomadic musician. A grand reckoning on the continent forces her to return to the way of the blade in her quest for vengeance and redemption. Moreover, we got the casting call for a second lead character in Blood Origin. This time it is about a male elf named Fjall. The casting call reads as follows. While about the same age as Ayle, he is from an opposing clan, implying that there may be a clash for dominance. Not only is he physically strong, but is described as raw, gritty, and visceral, certainly a contrast to the graceful strength that one might expect from Ayle. Oh, and last but not least, there is also the Witcher spin-off animated movie called Nightmare of the Wolf, about a young Vesemir. And fortunately, there are some things to report about it as well. The movie got its first official logo, that includes its name and a wolf skull. In addition, we have also learned how long this movie will be. Nightmare of the Wolf will run for 81 minutes. The film is being made, by the way, by the Korean studio Mir, who are most famous for the animation of Legend of Korra. Anyway guys, that's it for me for today. Have fun with the new season of Breakfast in Beauclair. I hope you all stay safe and well. We talk again in the next episode. Until then, thanks again for listening and good luck on the path.
From its inception, I've always had a clear vision of what I wanted the Breakfast in Beauclair brand to represent. While I could mostly bring that vision to life, there was one part of the brand that I knew I needed to call experts for: music. In an auditory medium, music, sound effects, and soundscapes are crucial to elevating your production, and there's no one I'd rather have in my booth than Alex and Chase from MojoFilter Media. They created a beautiful and unique podcast theme that evoked the spirit of the continent. Every few months, I'd pitch another mad idea: a looped, variant ambient tavern soundtrack for an educational video series, 3 special holiday remixes of the theme song, and a booming broadcast-like introduction for Tidings from Toussaint. Every single time I'm blown away. At MojoFilter Media, Alex and Chase work to make sure your sonic landscape fits the full vision for your podcast or video game. With affordable rates for any budget, you can make sure your content stands out and is recognizable for years to come, just like Breakfast in Beauclair's. If you're ready to add iconic music to your podcast or video game, visit www.mojofilter.media and get started with their free audio consultation today. Hey everyone, welcome back from the break. When we left off, we had discussed the introductory prophecy to Blood of Elves and examined Ciri's nightmares. The scene with Ciri and Geralt is our opening to the chapter, and the meat of it actually happens quite a bit later. About 2 years after the fall of Cintra, Dandelion serenades a mixed group of travelers who exchange information from around the continent. I really enjoy this scene. It opens with Dandelion closing a ballad, and we just get all of this gossip from around the continent, from elves, from dwarves, from halflings, humans as well. And from their dialogue, we get to not just hear about what's happened on the continent, but also see the relationship between humans and non-humans, between different kinds of classes and guilds.
I understand like this was needed because it's one of those, the first two books were short stories, and this is starting a novel. And they really needed to catch people up because I still see questions to this day of people not knowing where to start reading the Witcher books because they hear the first two are short stories and then the third one is a novel. And then it's always, well, do I need to read the short stories? It's like, well, you don't need to. And there's maybe only like 2 or 3 that will really help do it. But this right here, you just need to kind of catch people up. It's almost like the new season of a TV show when you have previously on and they kind of catch you up to speed and how it was done. And yeah, there's a lot of stuff they put in here. But like you mentioned, it's laying the groundwork for so much that is to come. And it was done very smoothly. And reading through and just looking at the name, and Alyssa, I know you're with me on this. When I see Dandelion, all I hear is the audiobook and Peter Kenny's Dandelion. And I can't not say, or think at least, I'll say Dandelion, but just Dandelion is always right there on the tip of the tongue.
Yeah, bless Peter Kenny. Also, thank you, Peter Kenny, for creating an entire audiobook for the Hanza holiday thing. But yeah, whenever I listen to the audiobooks, I have to switch a little bit. Honestly, even after the Netflix series using Jaskier, I have to just kind of switch in my mind between Jaskier and Dandelion as well.
It's hard for me too because I have actually 3 names for this character in my mind. Well, Jaskier is the show one, then Dandelion is the English one while reading the books in English, and of course the German one. For me, he's always Rittersporn. So it's not that easy.
Amazing. And does that mean buttercup in German?
No, it actually means larkspur. I think it's a flower, maybe.
Okay.
It's another kind of flower. Well, literally, it means night spur. Ritter means knight in German. And Sporn, like spur. Yeah.
Do y'all know if they changed any other names? Because I still can't get over that Jaskier's is changed in seemingly every other language.
Lars, did you make a series of posts about the names of the Witcher characters in different languages?
Right, in a few weeks ago. I did one on Jaskier, and I don't know, there are at least 12 different names for Jaskier. Why they're doing it? I think because, his name literally has a second meaning, and it's always a flower that kind of represents this character. You know, the English name Dandelion is perfect, as you have the word lion and dandy, which kind of describes his character. In German, you have Rittersporn, as the word Ritter, knight, kind of describes his character. I have no idea how all these other languages went by. I can look it up. Well, most of the languages that translate him literally as buttercup, I think.
I appreciate the German impulse to just kind of pull out all the contracted words.
Yeah, right. You're right. I did that. Right. That's the way German goes, putting thousands of words together and creating a new word.
It's incredible. Something that I would love to touch on is talk about the setting a little bit. And I'm going to butcher this, as I do, but I have a plausible reason for why I might pronounce it this way. Is it Bloveris? Like Dana Meave, Meadbh? Does that get the VE sound? This giant oak is spelled Bleobheris. Is it Bloveris?
Sure.
Yeah, maybe.
Sure. Whatever. I mean, I
knows?
literally, in my head was like, yeah, Bloveris.
Yeah.
Blover, yeah. Although I do like Bloveris with the V. That does sound a lot better.
Yeah, sounds like elder speech, so must be right.
All right, we're gonna go with it. And it's described in the book as a meeting ground for wanderers and famous for its tolerance and openness, and it is known to druids as the seat of friendship. We very quickly learn that despite everyone who has gathered under the tree, all of the humans and non-humans are separated. The non-humans are separated by species, so elves, dwarves, halflings, etc. And the humans are separated by class. So you have all the peasants, the merchants, and the noblemen all separated as well. And there's a really sweet passage that is in this introduction as well, where it says, "The exception as ever was the children. Children of elves, dwarves, halflings, gnomes, half-elves, quarter elves, and toddlers of mysterious provenance neither knew nor recognized racial or social divisions, at least not yet." And I think it does a really nice job of showing us the world of the continent without having any dialogue yet.
Yeah, it's one thing that drives me crazy when you hear people complain about, oh, SJW, Witcher, and all that, or, oh, I don't want politics in my blah, 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 blah. And again, right out of the gate here, Sapkowski is showing, now, it might be harsh to say it gets beat over our head later, but it's showing here there is racism here, there is segregation, and then amongst the humans, there's even class segregation. But, and again, I'm really glad you put that in there, it's showing the children don't care. The children don't care about, the racial divisions. They don't care about anything else. And that's Sapkowski's way, maybe I'm reading too much into this, of him saying that this stuff is all learned and they're innocent at first, and the adults that are doing all of this are doing it because it's not natural. It's done in their own way, and it's not of the natural order, I should say.
And I think one of the things that I really do appreciate about this opening as well is that it grounds the reader in something that feels real and flawed. I think it's very easy to fall into the trap of making everything quote unquote perfect fantasy worlds. It introduces us to the nuances of the continent and to the society that's here and what that integration successfully and unsuccessfully does. So I think it's a really lovely introduction to the rest of the story as well as the rest of the series. So as all of these travelers are talking, there are really three main points of discussion that happen throughout this chapter. The first is a debate of Geralt, Yen, and Ciri as myth or reality. The second is detailing the battles of Sodden. And the last thing that we get from this discussion is what is the state of the Northern Realms. So with Geralt, Yen, and Ciri, there's just a lot of speculation about, are they real? Because Dandelion keeps singing about them. And what actually happened to them, because everyone at various points thinks that they're dead.
I think it's the first time, at least in this book, where one of the universal themes of the Witcher main saga is discussed. And that is the question, what is a story, what is history, and how is it perceived? We learn in this chapter that history and stories depend on the viewpoint of those who tell them, not necessarily in the sense of history is written only by winners, because everyone has his or her own perspective on things, regardless if he won a war, if he lost a war. Even among those people who won the war, there are different views on things. And all those views are discussed in this chapter. Well, I kind of did the math for this chapter as I counted all the characters who were talking in this scene. Especially when I read it for the first time, it was a little bit confusing for me to get who was talking, what kingdom are they from. And excluding Dandelion, there were 14 characters, named ones and unnamed ones, who were talking. And all of them with different backgrounds: dwarves, elves, humans, mages, druids, barons, journeymen. I don't know, what do I have here? Warrior, of course. Then a gnome is among them too. And I think he covered the whole continent in this chapter.
And again, big props to Peter Kenny for voicing 14 separate characters in the same scene. Absolutely nuts. But yeah, definitely speaks to the diversity and the culture of the continent just by having all of these different people from different backgrounds and heritages in this one location. As you said, this is a huge theme of The Witcher. How do we define myth? How do we create it? And where do these stories come into play in both the present and the future? And it's something that we're going to continue to explore all the way to Lady of the Lake, which is where this whole idea really blows open.
Yeah, to hit on what you mentioned there about history, One thing that blew my mind, and a lot of people could not handle it, is when I was in graduate school, is the first class is basically, at least my experience in it, was basically them saying, oh yeah, everything you learned as an undergraduate in history, it might not mean anything. And then we learned that history is this blending of anthropology, of even sociology, and all of these kind of social sciences, if you will, because all that we know that happened in the past are firsthand accounts from their primary sources. And if there's only one primary source and it's only from one side, then that's all we have. If it's from one side who is in service to the king or a person in charge, they're going to be very biased. And we know from studying, numbers are always just throw them out the door. Like they say, oh, there was 100,000 strong army. And then we know about certain population numbers that is impossible. And anybody who has studied ancient history, I'll just use the Greeks as an example, there is so little actual evidence from there that we cannot say this 100% happened. So much of ancient Greek history is the vases.
Mm-hmm.
Like we look at vases and we're like, oh, they're depicting this. It's like, yeah, we're also depicting Heracles and other Greek gods. And so much of that is just taken with this massive, with a mountain of salt. And like that was the one thing that was hardest to understand was, it's like, no, this is what happened. This is what was written down. But then you're like, well, this was written down by one side that was there. Well, this other side, they were there also, and they're writing completely differing accounts. So what do you do? And the thing is, both are correct. And people are saying like, well, no, they're different. Like both cannot be correct. And it's like, they were there. We cannot actually disprove it. Now, if someone said an angel came down and sliced half an army in half, we don't have to take that as real. But if they're both offering realistic accounts, you have a primary source, then you're correct. It happened.
To get back to the text and the content of The Witcher, the people that are having this discussion about Geraltian and Ciri, there's an unnamed priest, and there's two people of immediate little importance that will turn up later in this series, and that is, I'm going to butcher this again, Vera Lowenhaupt, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, and Rayla of Lyria. As I've said before, Sapkowski does a really lovely job of building out the world using tertiary characters. And these are two people that, we will at least see in tiny little cameos through the rest of the series, but they do make their first appearance here. The second thing that's discussed in this grand conversation are the battles of Sodden. So do you guys have a little bit more information about the context of both these battles in the First Nilfgaardian War?
Yeah, the battle of Marnadal was Cintra, right? Where Iced was killed.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and in the show, Calanthe was there, but if I'm correct, in the book, she was not there. Isn't that right? I don't believe she was there because it was an absolute, destruction. Everything got destroyed, and it was one of those, oh my God, we lost the entire army. And if she would have been there, I kind of just would have assumed that she would have been captured, and then, well, there's the war.
I think Dandelion's account of Marnadal was that I think she might have been there, but she still came back.
Okay.
If I'm remembering correctly, I think the passage is that she basically fought like a lion all the way back through what I'm imagining is a moat, but maybe it's not. But she fought all the way back to the castle. At least I think that's what it is. Hey, it's Alyssa. I looked up the passage from Something More in Sword of Destiny, and Dandelion describes Calanthe's role at Marnadal and the massacre of Cintra as, the Nilfgaardians invaded across the passes. There were thousands of them. They surrounded the Cintran army in the Marnadal Valley. A battle was joined lasting the whole day, from dawn till dusk. The forces of Cintra fought courageously, but were decimated. The king fell, then Calanthe headed off a stampede, didn't let them disperse, gathered anyone she was able to around herself and the standard. They fought their way through the encirclement and fell back across the river toward the city. Calanthe defended the river crossing with a handful of knights, and shielded the retreat. They say she fought like a man, threw herself like a woman possessed into the greatest turmoil. They stabbed her with pikes as she charged the Nilfgaardian foot. She was transported to the city, gravely wounded.
Because she got the nickname from a previous battle when she was a lot younger, right? And that was...
Yeah.
Okay. I had everything good in the books, and then the show comes out, and so much of that was different, and it has so much has muddled and blended. Most of the stuff I say, I'm like, is that right? Because I don't want to speak and, as an authoritarian on it, and it'd be like, no, I didn't know. But yeah, I remember that was the battle that led to it. And then Sodden, what I get out of that was just the savagery from the magic and the mages that, we can imagine, or we can watch a movie and see a sword, hack off an arm or someone get impaled. But to try to imagine, magic ripping people apart, or again, I'm not sure if it was mentioned in there, but the depiction of Coral, her body and what happens to her.
Next chapter, yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess we saw the show. It kind of did that in there.
Yeah.
But to me, it was just the savagery of Sodden and how much it was the sacrifice of the 14 on the hill. I believe that's what it was.
Yeah.
And that's what I get out of that, mainly, that battle.
Lars, please feel free to correct me if any of this is incorrect. If I'm getting this right, there were 2 battles of Sodden. There was an earlier one where Nilfgaard was pushing their way forward, and they did win that initial skirmish. And then the second Battle of Sodden, which is the major one that we do end up seeing in the show, the one with the 14 on the hill, that happened in retaliation for Marnadal and Cintra. So Cintra ended up being the rallying cry of the North, leading to that stand on Sodden against Nilfgaard, what Sheldon Skaggs and Donimir of Troy detail here, which is having over 100,000 warriors at the second Battle of Sodden, with at least 30,000 maimed or killed. That's kind of the context in which they're talking about Sodden.
I think it's not necessary for the story, but I think it's a little bit of a shame that we don't learn anything more specific about the first Battle of Sodden, where it's just a fact mentioned in passing, where there was a first one and Nilfgaard won. And, well, as a Witcher history nerd, I'd really like to know more what happened there. What factions of the Northern Kingdoms fought at the first Battle of Sodden Hill? Who was it? The rest of the army of Cintra? Was it the kingdoms in the south, the regions in the south of the kingdom of Temeria? Was it Sodden again? Only Sodden? Was it only Sodden? Did Nilfgaard run over the army of Sodden? Well, this would be very interesting to know, at least. But we will never know, and our imagination needs to do the trick.
The second Battle of Sodden kind of definitively ended that first Nilfgaardian war. And we learn from this conversation that the northern forces, both mages and the actual kingdoms themselves, were led by Vilgefortz of Roggeveen and Vizimir of Redania. There's a brief summary of the northern kingdoms after this first Nilfgaardian war, in that they came together to fight off Nilfgaard, and then they just completely started going at each other's throats again. Which is a bit of a shame, of course, to be unified for this cause and then to have that breakdown after the fact. By the end of this section, everyone under the tree is kind of at each other's throats, debating Geralt's Yen and Ciri, the state of the North, what happened, what will happen in the future. And then they realize that Dandelion has wandered off, and he has snuck away after his little performance. Before we learn where Dandelion has gone, we're going to end today's discussion here. Join Brett from Whispers of Oxenfurt, Lars from WitcherFlix, and I in the next episode of Breakfast in Beauclair for our continued discussion of Andrzej Sapkowski's Blood of Elves, Chapter 1. Thanks for joining us at the Breakfast Table. For show notes, transcripts of each episode, and complete list of our social platforms and listening services, head over to breakfastandbeclair.com. Breakfast in Beauclair is created by Alyssa from GoodMorhen. It's hosted by Alyssa with the Tidings from Toussaint music by Lars from WitcherFlix. The show is edited by Alyssa with music from MojoFilter Media. Breakfast in Beauclair is produced by Alyssa in New York City with Louise of Covier, the owner of the Trailer's Porpoise, Eric Scotland, Katie, the Redhead of Toussaint, Jacoby, Julie, Jameson, Ava of Gullet, Behaven of the Edge of the World, Jacob Meeks, Charlotte from Megaberg, Glamour, Red Kite, the Original Roach, Arrow, Kitty, Dustin, Libby, the Castelbello Sommelier, Clara Odell, Gennady Mondilovich, Katrin from Austria, Brett from California, Wolf, and Corey from the US. Special thanks to Brett and Lars for joining us for this episode, and our international Hanza for their support.